Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unmuted Love. I'm so happy to have you here today. And I am C. Eshelman, your intrepid host. And I have today one of my favorite blog writers, Sarah Rosensweet. Now, she does lots of other things, but I only really know her work through her blog. And I have been reading it for such a long time. I feel like I know you, Sarah. So welcome to Unmuted Love. I'm so delighted to have you.
Thanks for having me. And my blog supports my work as a parenting coach. So I'd call myself first a coach and then a writer after that. But I am working on a book. So maybe someday it'll be first book, then first writer, then coach.
It's always fun to have that. I have that too. And so I'm like, well, I think now I'm a podcaster.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And I've been a podcaster for a few years now. So all of the things.
Yeah. So we end up doing all this stuff. The thing I love about you, though, is that while you don't seem to work with the population that I work with, which are families with children who come from difficult beginnings, so adoption generally, but early abuse, trauma, that doesn't seem to be your major focus. And yet, peaceful parenting really fits very well into therapeutic parenting. So it's a really nice fit for my program and my parents. So it's a good complement. And I'm just
what I always say is that peaceful parenting is good for everyone, but it's especially good for the kids who need something more. And parents often think the opposite, right? They think, oh, peaceful parenting is good if your kid is easy. But really, almost anything that's like kindness is good if your kid is easy. But really, when kids have extra challenges, whether it's behavioral challenges, which is a lot of the people in my, in my circles are kids who parents who have kids who are what we call complex, whether it's strong-willed, sensitive, spirited, neurodivergent, some of those that sort of extra kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And parents often think, well, I can't use peaceful parenting because those kids frankly, it's more challenging to be a parent of one of those kids. But I say it's even more important when you have a kid who has extra challenges to use peaceful parenting. So I think, that's what you're saying is with your population, it's extra important to use that kind of parenting. And I think that can be counterintuitive for folks sometimes.
Well, right. Because, when you have escalated behavior, then everyone and their mother is telling you, well, you need to be very firm. You need to.
Right. You need more discipline. Yeah. That kid just needs a little bit more discipline. Yeah. Can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And it just makes me sad and makes me shake my head.
Yeah, me too. And I was one of those parents who thought that when I brought my kids home for the first time, they were pretty much off the hook. Like, they were sort of ordinary kids times 10. They felt 20. I don't know. It was a lot of behavior. And I'm like, okay, I guess I have to I didn't think I was going to have to act like this, but I've got to act like my mother.
Right.
Mother was not really the best, nicest, peaceful parent. Let's just say that. She's definitely not therapeutic. And so I got harsher and more boundaried and more firm in my voice, and my face looked like this a lot. And the kids got, of course, worse and worse.
Right.
Right. And then I got worse and worse. I got more and more scared about myself and them. And oh man, I was a mess back in the beginning, which is a long time ago now. My kids are all grown up, thank goodness. And I learned a thing or two since then. I'm pretty sure I learned some of it from you, actually.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was really good when I finally did learn some things. You're a mom of 3, right? And
my kids are 25, 21, and 18.
Yeah, so you made it through.
Yeah. I know. You could say made it through, or you could say I'm entering the years of sad and lonely. No, I'm just kidding. I do. I love who they've become. And my daughter, sometimes my youngest, who's 18, she sometimes says, do you wish I were still little? And I was like, you know what? I really miss having little kids, but I don't wish you were still little, because I just love the person that you've turned into. I think you're amazing. And same with my sons. They are such fantastic humans that I wouldn't go back in time, but I do miss the days of having a younger family.
Yeah. Well, I don't miss it at all, just FYI, because it was hard.
Yeah.
But my kids are 29 and 31 now. And
okay.
I also have a set that's 40 and 43. So there's a big gap there. But
do you have any grandkids yet?
I have one 8-year-old grandson. So
nice.
Who I adore. But it's taken us a really long time to get to the place where I could say, I adore my kids. They are the best people ever. And I love talking to them and I love being in their lives. And I love that they finally know how to love and be loved, because that took a really long time for them to learn how to do that because they were so harmed in the beginning.
It's wonderful they got there.
Yes, and they did. And that's my message, right, to the parents who are listening here that I work with, is that just hang in here. Hang in here. It's a long journey for sure. It's beyond a marathon. It's 2 marathons. But, if you stay loving, you stay open, you stay present, they will get to where they need to go. It may not be where you imagined in the beginning, but they're going to grow up and they're going to grow into themselves. And that's the hope, right? It's just a little bit further down the road.
There are lots of ways to have a good life.
Right.
Like it might not look exactly like what your neighbor's kid's good life looks like, or the good life you imagine for your child. But I think that that's one thing to really keep in mind, no matter who your child is, that there are like lots and lots of ways to have a good life.
Oh, so much so. And my kids, of course, don't have, they didn't have like grow up, graduate from high school, go to college, graduate from college, go to master's degree program, whatever, like I did. They didn't do that. That's okay. Actually, the one of my children who had the hardest time with school and things like that, she's probably the happiest amongst all of us in terms of she just delights in her own life. She has friends, she's happy. And, that's what else did I want for her, really?
Yeah. My dad, who, for his idea of success is pretty traditional in terms of, the path you just said, high school, college, graduate school, professional degree. And a few years ago, he said, I've been really noticing there are lots of people. My dad's really social and outgoing, and he sort of makes friends wherever he goes, chats with the different people in the, coffee shop and whatever. And he said, I had a student who was he was actually a professor, and he said, I had a student who was in my counseling program, and she just decided that wasn't for her. And now she's the manager of a restaurant and she seems so happy. And, and it was just occurring to him that, people can have sort of non-professional jobs and lead a really happy and fulfilling life.
Yeah, it does dawn on people eventually.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. And actually for me too, my youngest, who's 29, has never worked, has never gone to college, didn't actually graduate from high school, got a certificate, was in high school till 21. It was a long road. And I was like, oh God, this is not good. And it's fine. It's totally fine. She lives independently. She loves her life, and I really, honestly, when I look at it, I'm like, I really wouldn't have wanted more from someone than to love their life,
Yeah.
So anyway, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool that I grew up.
Yeah,
because
that's right.
What it actually means. I guess I would like to know how you came across peaceful parenting, because that's not original, right? It's a style that came from somewhere else.
Yes and no. I will say that I had this, at least a precursor to this kind of parenting model for me. When I was really small, my parents had foster kids, and so they did some courses at like the I don't know, whoever was facilitating the placement of the foster kids. So they did early Adler. I don't know if you're familiar with Adler. Yeah. They did the parent effectiveness training and the Adlerian stuff. So I definitely was raised with, and I grew up in the 70s. And so I was like pretty, they were fairly ahead of the curve, I think, in terms of not super conventional parenting. So I didn't grow up with punishment and yelling and shaming, and they weren't perfect, but they're, for sure it was ahead of the curve that way. So I didn't have that modeled for me. Second, I think I was really influenced by the attachment parenting sort of movement when my first child was born in 2001. So I read a lot about, and I do have complaints about the Sears and the sort of the different parts of that. But in theory, attachment parenting, I think, is whatever you can do to create a healthy, strong attachment with your child. I support that. And I spent a lot of time doing that with my first child when he was a baby and early toddler. And then I started to notice that people around me were starting to say things like, when he cried, when he was, 2, when he cried, oh, don't pick him up. He's just trying to manipulate you. Or, don't reward bad behavior and all these things. And I was like, what? I've spent all this time building this bond with my child, and now you're instructing me to do things and I'm just talking about conventional parenting practices,
Mm-hmm.
instructing me to do things that really feel like they go against that bond. Why wouldn't I pick him up when he's crying? Why wouldn't I give him, connection and attention if that's what he's seeking? And so I already had this sort of uncomfortable feeling with the conventional parenting practices.
Mm-hmm.
And I had also read Alfie Kohn. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
Yeah.
I'd read his one of his first books, Punished by Rewards,
Mm-hmm.
even before I had kids, because I was interested in teaching. And so I already had been thinking a lot about rewards and punishment, what people today call consequences. And so I already knew that I didn't want to parent that way. And so I sort of just was parenting that way.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't call it peaceful parenting. I didn't have a name for it. I just was parenting with connection and compassion in mind. That's just how I wanted to be. I will also say that I was blessed with a pretty sturdy nervous system, which I think is something that a lot of parents, we can work on it. And I mentioned to you before we started recording that I have a course called How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids. So it's not like if you're reactive, it's just static and you're always going to be reactive. But I think some people do have a nervous system that makes it easier to stay calm than other people. So I just want to say there's nature and nurture there, right? With how reactive a parent is. When my oldest child was around, I think he was around 11 or 12, I came across Dr. Laura Markham's work and I read her book, Peaceful Parents, Happy Kids. And I went, oh my gosh, there's a name for this kind of parenting that I've been doing. I didn't know there was a name for it. And, this was before the internet, really. I mean, that was very modest internet. There was nothing really out there about parenting at this point.
Right.
So, I did end up becoming a parenting coach because I wanted to share my knowledge and my passion with other parents. And I did end up training with Dr. Laura. It wasn't that I adopted peaceful parenting, which did already exist, yes, but I sort of intuitively found my way, and that was what it happened to be called. That was a very long answer to your question.
No, I appreciate it because I sort of came to it circuitously like that as well. And, I've had to take it in a lot of different directions, but it still unfolds very similarly, which is connection over correction and really figuring out how to have a relationship with a child instead of having a controlling power over sort of.
Yeah. What Alfie Kohn says, working with instead of doing to.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting that it's so hard to conceive of it for most parents. What do you mean working with a 5-year-old, about going to school? They have to go to school. They need to put their shoes on. I mean, it's not a conversation. You got to do it.
Yeah, we're swimming in a control mindset of parents over children. And, I always like to say, it's not that we're equals because kids still need guidance. And I was just visiting my sister who has an 8-year-old, and her 8-year-old was really, really mad that we weren't letting her start a 2-hour movie at 7:00 at night on a school night. She was so, I want to watch a movie. And I said, you know what? I totally get it. It is so annoying and frustrating that we're not just letting you do whatever you want. You can watch a show. Like, we weren't saying nothing. You can watch a show, but a movie's too long. And I said, I get it. It's really frustrating that the grownups are just bossing you around and you don't get to decide what you want to do. And I said, but you know what? There's a reason why 8-year-olds don't have their own apartments. It's because they're generally not ready to make all of the decisions for themselves, and they still need parents to guide them. And that's what it comes down to for me, is that kids still need guidance, but they deserve as much respect and rights as any human being, no matter how old they are. So it's finding that balance between respecting them as human beings with preferences and desires and opinions, and listening to them and trying to. You've been reading me for a while, so I talk about the Goodwill Bank, and really the deposits in the Goodwill Bank are those things that I just said: listening to them, respecting them, trying to take their preferences into account, being trustworthy, not being arbitrary, controlling, power tripping. And then you have this nice beefy Goodwill Bank. And then when there are those instances where you say, you know what, I'm really sorry, there's no time for a movie tonight. They might not get it, they might not like it, but all of your past interactions have shown them that you have their best interests at heart. And I think that is what's lacking in a lot of parent-child relationships, teacher-student relationships, is that adults, use their power over kids a lot. And, most kids have a sense deep down that that's not right. That just because you have more money, you're bigger, you have, more power than I do, it doesn't mean that you should get your way all the time.
Right. Yeah. So this is interesting for me because I think that a lot of listeners here are working very hard to be a therapeutic parent to their children who have very big survival behaviors. And the survival behaviors persist in the presence of perfectly good, peaceful parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, the parents become tired and worn out and worn thin. And then they begin to think that this is wrong. This parenting is wrong. Because no matter how much relationship I have tried to build over the last 10 or 12 years, what I get is I don't care and leave me alone, and I want to do it my way. And my way is going to be something a little more dangerous, a little less safe, a little more outside the box, social box. What would you say to parents who are running thin after 10 years of this peaceful parenting, but the child doesn't recognize it as peaceful parenting at all?
Right.
It still projects the other.
Yeah. So I named my business Reimagine Peaceful Parenting because I think that there is this idea out there. I've had parents say to me, I read this book and the author said that if I empathize with my child, they're going to melt into my arms crying. And that's not what happens with me. I empathize with my child and they're still, mad as heck and doing the, survival behaviors, as you say. And part of my mission is to let parents know that you can do everything, quote, right in terms of peaceful parenting. And it's not necessarily going to look like what the books say it's going to look like, because of, the qualities of the traumas and histories of the kids in the families that you work with, because of the complex children in the families that I work with. You can do everything, quote, right. And it's still going to be hard sometimes. And what I always say to parents is, a lot of people have come to me because they have tried conventional parenting and it hasn't worked. So I say to them, it didn't work what you were doing before. And I have a feeling if you go back to that, in fact, I'm fairly positive, if you went back to yelling, shaming, punishments, things would be even worse than they are now. So you might not ever get to what one of my Peaceful Parenting memberships parents said once was, it feels like everybody else is skipping through a field of daisies with their child. And I'm just like, for me, it's just like one struggle after another. And so we kind of, dark laughter about you might not ever feel like you're skipping through a field of daisies with your child. And it doesn't mean that peaceful parenting isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I was just interviewing Dr. Jennifer Fraser, and she wrote The Gaslit Brain and The Bullied Brain, which is neither really here nor there in a way, except that she did all this vast neuroscience research. And I was asking her, like a similar question, and like, are all of our kids just going to grow up and be psychopathic, because they lie, steal, they're violent sometimes, they disregard all authority? And her sweet answer was, yeah, if you don't recognize what the child is living through and you become a kind of torture chamber for them and you persist, then it's possible that that's what you will end up with. However, the hope is, and the research proves it, that if you were to work on your empathy, work on your own regulation, work on your own thinking about kids and parents and all of that, that shift in you will shift the brain of the child, even if in childhood it's not shifted yet. So that's really a powerful notion that in childhood it may not be shifted yet. But
I was going to say the brain development too. A kid at 8 is going to be a lot different than a kid at 18 or 28. Just because of the brain development. I'm sure you saw that new research that came out that talked about the phases of brain development. There's one that ends at 9 and then the next one ends at 30. So it's really, I think you just don't know what you're growing until it's grown, and that there's a certain amount of faith in, and I'm not religious, so I don't mean religious faith, but just like human faith and believing in human potential and believing in love and believing in compassion, that you might get something different in a number of years than it feels like you're getting in the present.
Right. And her point was that believe it can be different and stay the course.
Yes.
And it likely will be different.
Yeah.
Not 100%, of course, but a lot.
Well, and I mean, I know this is probably cold comfort, but I think if I were a parent of a kid who was having those challenges and I parented peacefully and with compassion and love and connection, and even if the kid grew up to have a lot of challenges, I would at least know I gave as much love and compassion and connection as I could, Right. And I did whatever I could to show that child the love that maybe they needed for healing.
Right. So that you can feel good about yourself and not have regret and not look back and wonder, what if I had listened to my child more? Right.
Yeah. I don't think anyone regrets too much love, but I know a lot of parents regret too much harshness.
Yeah, I do too. I know that. Too. And I know the shame that parents live with, right? There's a lot of shame in parenting if you use traditional strategies and they don't work, and then you use them harder, more fiercely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of regret and a lot of shame in that. So let's sort of shift a little bit and go to, some advice from your vast well of experience, maybe around just walking me through as though I'm a parent of, let's say, a 14-year-old. And the 14-year-old has all the adolescent behaviors, only also has a lot of negative things to say, superlatives, explicatives.
I think I teach a course on peaceful parenting teenagers. And one thing that I say two things that weave through every module, or, it's a live course. So every meeting that we have, one is, don't take it personally. The kid might be playing hot potato, hold my difficult feelings. But it's not about you. Even if they're saying it's about you and trying to make it about you, if you are practicing this kind of parenting, you're not being controlling and you're trying for connection and being fairly reasonable. You don't have to be perfect. And they're telling you that you're the worst. It's not about you. It's about whatever emotions they're experiencing at the time. And the other piece that I talk about for teenagers is you always have to ask yourself, at what cost to the relationship? I have a client who for a year has been talking to me about how her child won't unpack her lunchbox and wash her lunch containers. I'm sure for some of your listeners, that sounds like champagne problems. But, everybody's problems are everybody's problems. And I always say there's no short supply of empathy. But I said to her, and I've said this a number of times, basically, would it kill you to just unpack the lunch? Think of it as a gift, is fighting with her. And you might be able to get her to do her lunch box if you fight with her enough every day, but at what cost to the relationship? And is it really going to kill you to unpack her lunch every day? And can you think of it as a gift? And she said, she's a person who works in the nonprofit. And so she kind of has her eyes on like all the problems in the world right now. And she said, but one of the problems in the world is that nobody cleans up after themselves and everybody makes messes and expects everybody else to clean it up. And I said, I hear you. And also one of the problems in the world is that people don't nurture and care for each other enough. So maybe you could focus on that this is like you are nurturing and caring for your child by cleaning out her lunchbox every day, and that you're modeling that for her. And that's important, as important to me as, being able to clean up your own messes.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great lesson. I'm wondering if there's a pill for not taking it personally.
Oh, lots of self-talk. Lots of self-talk is the answer for not taking it personally. And also, having someone that you can vent to, a friend or therapist, or a great hand-in-hand tool is listening partners, getting a listening partner, somebody that you can talk to who's not your kid, who you can vent to about, everything they did or said that day. That's so annoying. And I think also, so there's sort of two big ideas that I talk about in peaceful parenting, that if people can't really truly believe these two things, they're never going to be able to do this kind of parenting with any, when I say success, I mean that they're truly living it, even if the results aren't what they think the results should be. But if they can't truly live peaceful parenting unless they can do these two things. Remind me to come back. The second one is going to answer the question that you just said. But the first one is believing that kids are doing the best they can. Mm-hmm. And that they're having a hard time, not giving us a hard time. That actually fits in with not taking it personally as well, right? Yeah. They're having a hard time, not giving us a hard time, that if they could do better, they would, because they want to be good. They want to be in connection. They want to be good. And then the second piece is the self-compassion piece, which is that I guess both of those parts are the answer to how to not take it personally. Even though my kid just, dropped 10 F-bombs in my face, I'm still worthy and lovable. Yeah. So that's the part that stops us from going into the shame spiral of, I'm a terrible parent. Why haven't I fixed this yet? They're going to grow up to be, living in a van down by the river. Although today that's #van life, right? And it's maybe not so bad. So, really that self-compassion piece, that there's nothing that your child does or says that takes away your fundamental worthiness and lovability as a human being. And to remember that in those hard moments, I think, is a big part of not taking it personally.
Yeah. It's such a lesson in peaceful parenting, I think, for humanity, really, in general, right? I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, culturally, worldwide, we've kind of lost some of our collective humanity around things like that, compassion for ourselves, compassion for others. And so then when you talk about compassion for your children, people are like, I just got to get them grown up. Like, yeah, okay. Well, they're going to, if you don't use compassion with yourself and with them, they're going to just fit right into the society that we're making, right? Yeah, less compassionate, less loving, less about love and more about hate. And that's so painful.
Yeah. When I'm reading the news, especially in this past year and a bit, I find myself just muttering to myself, what is wrong with people? What is wrong with people? And then the answer, I think, is not enough love, not enough grace, not enough compassion, and not enough nurturing. And I really do think that's what's, quote, wrong with people.
What do you think about the statistics around anxiety and depression hitting the roof with kids? And I guess I would like to hear your thoughts on what you think is contributing to this uptick.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I just, my podcast that's just coming out this week is with Lenore Skenazy, the Free Range Kids movement founder. And she has a new foundation called Let Grow, and it's to increase childhood independence and freedom. And she talks about, or her foundation talks a lot about, that's one big contributor to the rise of childhood anxiety, is that kids are always supervised and that they never can figure anything out on their own, right? And the sort of anti-anxiety sentiment that I always talk about in my coaching is, I can handle this. So one of my favorite anxiety resources is Lynn Lyons, who wrote a book called Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents. And she says anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of the resources that we have to deal with it. But if you're a kid and you never have to, quote, deal with a problem, then you won't know what your own capabilities are. You won't know what your own resources are, and everything will feel too insurmountable. And of course, that makes you feel really anxious, right? When you don't know what to do, you don't know how to solve problems. So I think that's part of it, is that loss of childhood independence and unsupervised playtime. Another part of it that I think that more directly is what I talk about and teach with parents is that we are not very good with emotion. And so we often try to shut down kids' emotions either by, I often talk about two what seem like polar opposite reactions to child's emotions. One is the suck it up, buttercup, stop crying. It's not a big deal. Get over it. Exactly. And the other one is the fix it, which is, oh my gosh, I'll get you another one. Don't worry. Don't cry. We'll fix it. That sort of that fear that parents get when their child is really upset about something. And strangely, they both seem like one you would call it more in the authoritarian response to emotion, the suck it up. The other one you might call a more permissive approach, right? That like, oh, let me fix that. Let me get that for you, honey. And the funny thing is that they both have this, think of them as flip sides of the same coin. And they both serve to stop children from feeling their feelings. And so what we always talk about in peaceful parenting is welcoming feelings, linking it back to anxiety and depression. And I would add a third really major emotional problem that we have today is anger management. People who are really explosive and really angry, right? And I thought about it one day and I thought, those really clearly mirror the fight, flight, and freeze responses, right? The fight is the anger problems. the flight is anxiety, the freeze is depression. And I have this theory, unscientifically tested, completely just out of my own brain and my experience, is that when people don't learn how to regulate their emotions, they get stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze response because they don't know how to move through the feelings. And so I think people tend to get stuck in either the fight, the flight, or the freeze, maybe some at different times. But I think that as parents or caregivers, us helping our children move through the feelings, and of course, I'm not saying that, if your kid wants the red cup instead of the blue cup, that you're not going to change to the red cup, because of course you're going to change to the red cup. We try to be flexible whenever possible. We try to, as I was saying before, respect their preferences, but there are going to be times when you can't, right? Or it's impossible, or it just doesn't make sense, or you have to get to work, or you're going to lose your job, right? So there are times when, you can't, quote, make them happy, and you're just going to welcome their feelings, recognize that you don't get to decide what they're upset about. I had this great example the other day. I was trying this mom I've been working with for quite a while. She has a lot of kids, and her oldest is 13 and one of her youngest is a toddler. They were going somewhere, and she said to her 13-year-old, if you want to stop at the store, the mall, we can look for a dress. And I don't know, because I guess there was a dance coming up or something like that. And her daughter said, I don't want to go with younger brother. He's so embarrassing. I'm not going to the store with him. And the mom was saying, oh, come on. He's your brother. It's not a big deal. Of course we can go in the store with him. Like, I don't know if we can get out another time to look for a dress. And the mom was like, really couldn't understand. Her daughter was being so unreasonable. And I said, look, what if you were driving to go look for a dress for yourself and you spilled a chocolate milkshake all down your front, and you had, chocolate milkshake all over your pants? Would you want to go in a store and go dress shopping looking like that? And she's like, no, probably not. And I was like, see, you can relate to that being embarrassing, going in but for your daughter, it's bringing her toddler brother into the store is just as embarrassing as going in with a chocolate milkshake. So really, I got a bit off topic there, but talking about empathy, sure, that we don't get to decide what kids are upset about, right? That it might not make sense to us, but we can always connect to the feeling that's underneath whatever it is that they're upset about and try to empathize with that. So I helped her connect with the feeling of, embarrassment that people would stare at her and, she didn't want to stand out, right? And she could understand that, even if she couldn't relate to it being because she had a toddler in tow. So part of the creating emotional health and mental health is helping kids navigate those big feelings that they have, and knowing, by us welcoming them and not acting like it's an emergency, and knowing that holding the confidence that they can get through to the other side, even if it's something that they are upset about.
I love that. The word confidence it resonated with me in the last bit you were talking about. Children having the confidence that they can solve problems, because they bumped into enough problems where they're like, yeah, I was able to solve that problem. But what you get is confidence. This is the same kind of thing. You get confidence by all of these things. And what do you need to be able to live in a world like ours? You need confidence and faith that you can figure it out. And so, yeah, I think a lot of roads lead to confidence. And
kids might make mistakes along the way. And I was just reminding a client today of the old Mark Twain quote, which is, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So that we're there as the safety net for them to make mistakes and bad judgment, and hopefully nothing too serious. But as you said, the confidence comes from being able to figure it out. And sometimes they won't get it right.
Right. That's right. And they need a soft landing so that when they make mistakes, they don't crash and burn.
Exactly.
Right. So that's the important piece for parents. Just be a soft landing. They'll learn if you don't make them learn that they're just shameful pieces of something, right? Instead of just caring about them, loving them, letting them know that they are worthy of this empathy, and they will learn the lesson that they need to from their own mistake. So it's so hard to trust for some reason, but it seems clear to me, right?
It is hard to trust, and it's also hard to not do what I call piling on when they do make that mistake, right? And, I have a podcast episode called It Doesn't Have to Be a Teachable Moment, because so much of the time parents think, oh, well, I've got to make sure they understand why they lost their jacket because they didn't put it right in their backpack when they took it off at recess. And, and it could be that there actually is an information gap. And if you think your kid really doesn't understand why something happened, instead of telling them why it happened, you can always say, I wonder why that happened. And I wonder what you could do next time. Like if you really do feel like there needs to be teaching, get curious and ask them questions and help them think of it. That builds executive function too, right? Help them think of what went wrong and what they could do instead of telling them what went wrong and what they could do next time. And instead of piling on, like, even if you don't do it in a mean way, they still experience as piling on. Like, well, if you had put your coat in your backpack, like I told you to, you wouldn't have lost your coat, right? Chances are they know that. If they don't, get curious, ask some I wonder questions about the whatever happened. But piling on just really actually can prevent them from learning the lesson, because then they feel resentful of you and it becomes an interpersonal thing instead of the question of how do we make sure you don't lose stuff.
Right. It also makes them deaf, I've noticed.
Yeah. Like la, 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 like the peanuts,
Exactly. Sometimes I just ask parents, how many times, do you think she doesn't really know that not doing her homework got her the F?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, okay, but how many times have you told her that not doing her homework was going to get her an F?
It's not like there's going to be the 501st time is going to be the magical time that gets through, and the 500 times before that didn't.
Well, and then the other thing that parents will often say is, well, I've told her 100 times. And I'm like, yes, and it didn't work. So let's not do it 101 times.
Exactly.
Let's not do that. Something's not working in that particular delivery. How about, what do you think you'd like to hear about that?
Yeah. How can I support you?
Yeah. So hard to be a parent.
It is. It is hard.
Kid, but it's hard to be a parent too, right?
Yeah.
Plus you have to unlearn everything that happened to you. Now you didn't have to do that because you had some pretty enlightened parents. Not to say they were perfect, but they were.
Yeah, they had
their path.
Yeah, they were on the path for sure. And I know it gave me a leg up.
Yeah. I had a leg down. So I had a lot of unlearning to do on parenting from my childhood. And I think a lot of people have that.
A lot of people do. My parents did for sure. And that's probably why they did the learning that they did, is because they also had legs down. We just coined a very strange expression in parenting.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to repeat that. But hey, I don't want us to run out of time before you have a chance to talk about all the wonderful services you provide. So let's take this time. I'll just remind you that everything that's specific will be in the show notes. And so you don't have to say HTTP things.
Okay. So I'm a peaceful parenting coach, as we mentioned. So I have a range of services from one-on-one coaching. I have a membership, which is really lovely, beautiful corner of the internet where we do drop in group coaching twice a week and have lots of other fun stuff inside the membership. I have a podcast called the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I have a newsletter on Substack. Oh, and I was going to tell your listeners about a free resource that I have. We've sort of circled around the idea of parental self-regulation while we were talking today. If you're new to peaceful parenting, or you want to, up your game in peaceful parenting, starting with your own regulation is always the place to start, because you could learn, someone could learn tools or strategies from you or from me, but if they can't stay calm or calmish even in the moment to be able to think of what they should do, it doesn't matter how many tools they have. And also I'm sure you talk about co-regulation a lot in your work. And if your kiddo's having a hard time and there's nothing that you can say or do that will help them, the thing you can do to help them is to be calm yourself and be that anchor in the storm. So I have a free course called How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids. I'm really basic with my names of my the Peaceful Parenting Podcast and How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids. So that is on my website. I think it's on the front page and also on the resources. I've also got a lot of other free resources on the resource page, and including an ebook on stop sibling fights and lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, I enjoyed reading through your website just earlier. I was like, I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about and who I'm talking to. I'm like, oh, I love this website. So nice. So
yeah, I've been doing this for like 13 years now. So I've created, and I'm a natural born teacher. So I've created a lot of resources for parents. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I forgot about this thing that I made. I got to get that out again.
Totally. I've been doing this for 40 years. It's like, okay, yeah, I have forgotten more than I currently know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we still have a lot to offer, even if we've forgotten more than we know.
Sarah, I really appreciate your time and your wisdom, and you're delightful. And I hope people will make use of your services, because they're a beautiful adjunct to what I do. So any of you listeners out there who feel like you've taken in what I have to offer and you love that, you're going to love this. So I really want to encourage you to check that out.
Well, thank you so much. And I really especially appreciate that you're bringing this type of parenting to families that have like more than their fair of challenges, and kids who've had more than their fair of challenges. As I said at the beginning, there's this myth out there that you can only do peaceful parenting if your kids are easy. And I say, those kids are going to be fine. The kids who really need it are the ones who are more complex or who have the difficult starts like you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much. So everyone, thank you so much for joining me here today with Sarah Rosensweet, who is delightful. So make sure you go to her website and check out all of her resources, because you can never have too much when you are living with a child who's been harmed earlier in their lives, right? Because life is as hard as it feels sometimes, and it can be easier with a real understanding of how to be present.